The courtroom was eerily silent. The only sound was the occasional rustle of papers and the faint hum of the ceiling fan. All eyes were on a 7-year-old black girl, Amira Daniels, as she sat on the witness stand, her small frame dwarfed by the massive wooden chair. Beside her, sitting obediently on the floor, was Max, a German shepherd, his deep brown eyes scanning the room with quiet intensity. He was more than just a pet. He was her therapy dog, assigned to her after the trauma she had endured. His presence was supposed to comfort her, to help her find her voice again. But at this moment, it felt like the courtroom itself was against her. At the judge's bench, Judge William Walker, a middle-aged white man with sharp blue eyes and a permanent scowl, leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the wooden surface. He had seen many cases in his time, but from the moment Amira walked in, his demeanor had been dismissive. He sighed, flipping through the case file. "All right, let's make this quick," he said, his voice dripping with impatience. "This is a waste of the court's time." Amira sat frozen, her small hands gripping the leash of Max as if it were the only thing tethering her to reality. Across the courtroom, at the defense table, Daniel Whitmore, a well-dressed white businessman in his mid-40s, smirked slightly. He sat with too much confidence, as if he already knew the outcome of the trial. His lawyer, Richard Coleman, a smug-looking man in a navy blue suit, adjusted his tie before speaking. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is absurd. We're talking about the testimony of a child, one who hasn't spoken a single word since the alleged incident." He made air quotes with his fingers, emphasizing his disbelief. Some people in the audience chuckled softly. Judge Walker didn't stop them. Instead, he looked at the prosecutor, Elena Brooks, a sharp, no-nonsense black woman in her late 30s. "Miss Brooks, do you really expect me to take the word of a 7-year-old? A child who hasn't even given a verbal statement?" His tone was condescending, laced with irritation. Elena's jaw clenched. "Amira Daniels witnessed Mr. Whitmore committing a crime. Just because she hasn't spoken doesn't mean her testimony is invalid. Her trauma is real, and her presence here today is proof of that." Coleman chuckled. "Come on, she's just a little girl with a pet dog. This isn't real evidence." Amira flinched slightly at his words, her grip on Max's leash tightening. Judge Walker sighed again and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Let's cut to the chase. Miss Daniels, do you have anything to say?" Silence. Amira didn't respond. She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She just sat there, her wide brown eyes locked onto Whitmore. The tension in the room thickened. Max, who had been lying quietly at her feet, suddenly lifted his head. His ears twitched. His body stiffened. Elena took a step forward. "Your Honor, Amira has been undergoing therapy with Max. She's been taught ways to communicate non-verbally. If she can't speak, that doesn't mean she can't tell us the truth." Judge Walker scoffed. "So now we're using a dog as a witness?" Another round of soft chuckles from the audience. But Amira didn't react. She simply raised her hand and gave Max a subtle signal. It was barely noticeable, a slight movement of her fingers, a motion she had practiced many times before. And that's when everything changed. For a moment, the courtroom remained still. Amira's fingers twitched slightly, so small a movement that most people would have missed it. But Max didn't. The German shepherd immediately stiffened. His ears perked up, his deep brown eyes locking onto Daniel Whitmore, the white businessman sitting confidently at the defense table. Then came the growl. Low, deep, and unmistakably dangerous. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. The tension in the air grew thick. Even Judge Walker, who had been dismissive moments ago, sat up straighter in his chair. "Control that animal," Whitmore's lawyer, Richard Coleman, snapped, glaring at Amira. But Amira didn't say or do anything. She simply kept her hand on Max's leash. The growl grew louder. Max's fur bristled, his tail stiff, his muscles coiled like a spring about to snap. "And then," he barked. A loud, sharp, commanding bark, so powerful that it echoed through the entire courtroom. Gasps filled the room as people jerked back in their seats. Daniel Whitmore, who had been arrogantly relaxed, flinched. His fingers tightened around the table's edge. His jaw clenched. A flicker of something, fear, crossed his face for the briefest second before he forced it away. But Max didn't stop. He barked again, then lunged slightly forward, the leash straining in Amira's tiny grip. His entire body language screamed one thing: recognition. This wasn't just an alert. He knew Whitmore. The courtroom turned into chaos. Murmurs and whispers spread through the audience. The jury exchanged nervous glances. Elena Brooks, the prosecutor, raised an eyebrow in sudden interest. Even the bailiff, a large man standing by the door, shifted uneasily. Judge Walker's eyes flickered between Max and Whitmore. His lips pressed into a thin line. He was still skeptical, but now there was something else. Doubt. "Enough of this nonsense!" Richard Coleman's voice cut through the noise, his face red with frustration. "This is ridiculous. A dog barking in a courtroom is not evidence. I move to dismiss this case immediately." He turned toward Judge Walker, his expression expectant. The judge had already been on their side before. He would surely throw this out now. But Judge Walker didn't say anything. For the first time since the hearing started, he looked unsure. His fingers tapped the wooden bench, his gaze lingering on Max, who was still locked onto Whitmore like a predator sizing up its prey. The air was shifting. Whitmore shifted in his seat, adjusting his suit jacket. His face was composed, but there was tension in his shoulders now. He cleared his throat, forcing a chuckle. "It's just a dog. The girls trained it to react like this. It's all an act." But his voice was a little too tight. Elena Brooks, sensing the change, stepped forward. "Your Honor, this isn't just any dog. Max is a trained former police K9. He's been trained to identify suspects, sense, and danger." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Judge Walker glanced toward her, then back at Max, who had not broken eye contact with Whitmore even once. His fingers stopped tapping, his lips pursed. For the first time, he was hesitating. A tense silence filled the courtroom. Judge Walker's eyes remained on Max, watching as the dog stood firm, muscles coiled, eyes still locked onto Daniel Whitmore. But it wasn't just an aggressive reaction, it was recognition. Then, Elena Brooks stepped forward, her voice steady but carrying a sharp edge. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce new evidence that may explain exactly why Max is reacting this way." Judge Walker, still looking skeptical but clearly unnerved, leaned forward. "This better be good, Miss Brooks." Elena nodded to her assistant, who quickly walked up and placed a thick folder on the table. "This is Max's official service record," she said, flipping open the file. "Before being placed as a therapy dog for Amira, Max was a trained police K9. He specialized in suspect identification and scent tracking." The words hung heavy in the air. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Judge Walker's brow furrowed. His fingers gripped the edge of his desk. He hadn't expected this. Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. "Max isn't just barking randomly. He was trained to detect criminals, to remember scents associated with crimes. If he's reacting to Mr. Whitmore, it's not because of a child's signal. It's because he knows something we don't." Gasps rippled through the audience. Whitmore's lawyer, Richard Coleman, shot to his feet. "Objection! This is nothing but speculation." Elena cut him off, slamming another document onto the table. "This is a police report from 2 years ago. It details a case where Max was used to track down suspects in a high-profile corporate fraud and trafficking ring." She turned, her eyes locked onto Whitmore. "And guess whose name appears in the initial investigation before the case was mysteriously dropped?" The courtroom erupted into whispers. Daniel Whitmore's face drained of color. His confident smirk was gone. Judge Walker's expression shifted, first confusion, then something else, something darker. Elena wasn't done. She pulled out one more file, an internal review report. "Your Honor, I also have evidence that you personally dismissed multiple cases involving Black victims over the last 10 years. The entire courtroom fell silent. Judge Walker stiffened, his jaw locked. Elena's eyes narrowed. including one involving a man connected to Mr. Whitmore's past business dealings. More whispers. A few reporters in the back grabbed their phones. The weight of the accusations hung heavy in the room. Whitmore shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but Judge Walker, for the first time, looked shaken. The walls were closing in. For a brief moment, everything stood still. The courtroom, once filled with quiet murmurs and skeptical glances, was now drowning in tension. Max had not backed down. If anything, his reaction grew more intense. The German shepherd lunged forward, the leash tightening in Amira's tiny hands. His deep growl reverberated through the room, his sharp eyes locked onto Daniel Whitmore. And then something shocking happened. As Whitmore shifted in his chair, the sleeve of his expensive suit jacket slipped back, revealing faint, jagged scratches along his wrist. Elena noticed instantly. So did Max. A low snarl rumbled from his throat. "Your Honor," Elena said, her voice cutting through the thick air. "We have reason to believe these scratches match the injury report from an unsolved assault last month. An attack on another black child who was silenced before she could testify." Gasps erupted across the room. The weight of her words hit like a freight train. Whitmore's lawyer stumbled for a response. This is a setup," he stammered. "Coincidence. A dog barking doesn't prove anything." But Judge Walker didn't respond. For the first time since the trial began, he looked like a man trapped. Because now he had no choice. He couldn't dismiss this case. Not when the entire courtroom had just witnessed it unfold. Not when reporters had already started typing furiously on their phones. Not when the jury looked visibly disturbed. And certainly not when his own name had just been linked to covering up multiple cases like this one. His fingers tightened around his gavel. He swallowed hard. Then in a voice far weaker than before, he spoke. "This court will now move to reopen the investigation and place Mr. Whitmore under official scrutiny." The reaction was immediate. The crowd gasped. Whitmore shot up from his seat, his face twisted in panic. Reporters rushed toward the exits, eager to break the story. Outside, news vans began arriving, cameras flashing. It had started. A scandal, a full-blown courtroom disaster. And at the center of it all, a little black girl and her dog. The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse swung open, letting in the golden afternoon sunlight. For the first time since this nightmare began, Amira Daniels stepped outside, free. The air felt lighter. The burden she had carried for so long, the fear, the silence, it was all fading. And beside her, Max walked proudly, his head held high, his ears perked up, sensing the change in the atmosphere. The moment they reached the courthouse steps, Amira dropped to her knees and wrapped her small arms around his thick fur. She buried her face in his coat, holding on to him like an anchor. A soft giggle escaped her lips. Not forced, not hesitant. A real, genuine, joyful laugh. Her mother, standing nearby, gasped softly, pressing a trembling hand to her lips. Amira was smiling. She had been silent for so long, so afraid, so lost in the shadows of what had happened. But now, she had faced the monster. She had stood her ground. And she had won. Behind them, the courthouse buzzed with chaos. News reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, microphones capturing every update. Breaking news: Judge Walker under federal investigation for suppressing racial discrimination cases. Daniel Whitmore officially named a prime suspect in multiple crimes. Brave little girl and her dog exposed corruption in the justice system. Judge Walker's career was over. His name would be remembered, but not with honor. But Amira's? Her name would inspire. Max nudged her cheek gently, sensing her emotions, his tail wagging. Amira pulled back slightly, looking into his warm brown eyes. "You protected me," she whispered softly, her voice clear and strong for the first time in weeks. Max let out a quiet huff, as if he understood. And then, with her head held high, Amira stood up, gripping Max's leash. not out of fear, but with pride. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. As she and Max walked down the courthouse steps together, the world watched. And for the first time in a long, long time, the future felt bright.